For 15 hours, Dr. Beck Weathers lay in the snow on Everest, judged dead by other climbers, before he woke up and walked back toward camp. The lowest point of Beck Weathers' story is almost impossible to stage in the mind because, by every outward sign available to the people around him, it was over. During the 1996 Mount Everest disaster, fellow climbers found Weathers in a hypothermic state and determined that he was dead. On a mountain already engulfed in crisis, that judgment carried brutal practical weight. Everest in a storm does not offer unlimited rescues, unlimited strength, or unlimited time. Decisions become triage, and triage means some people are helped, while others are not. Somewhere below the summit, in conditions severe enough to kill experienced climbers, Weathers was left where he lay. At home, the consequences of that decision were already moving down a phone line. His wife, Peach, received a call at 6 a.m. from his outfitter, informing her that he had died on the mountain. Before his body was recovered, before any final proof could be given, his death had effectively entered the world as fact. And that is the first tension in this story. How does a man come back from a moment that has already been closed by everyone else? Part 1. The blind spot. The answer begins before the storm, with a vulnerability that did not look dramatic until it became catastrophic. Weathers had undergone a radial keratotomy, an eye surgery that later proved dangerously relevant at extreme altitude. According to reporting on his case, atmospheric pressure changes on Everest caused him to go nearly blind. That detail matters because it strips away the myth that mountain disaster is always only about courage or weakness. Sometimes survival turns on a medical variable that seems distant from the central challenge until the environment magnifies it. High on Everest, impaired vision was not a small inconvenience. It was exposure. It was delay. It was separation from safe movement and timely descent. So before the hypothermic coma, before the frostbite and the helicopter, there was this hidden fault line, a previous surgery interacting with altitude in a way that left him nearly unable to see. On a mountain where every step depends on judgment, balance, and timing, that kind of blindness can cascade fast. The storm made the danger visible, but the danger had already been building inside the story, in the pressure behind his own eyes. The question now becomes even sharper. If blindness helped place him in mortal danger, what exactly allowed him to return from it? Part 2, 15 hours. By the verified accounts, Weathers lay unconscious in the snow in a hypothermic coma for 15 hours before he woke up and began walking toward high camp. That is the central medical astonishment of his survival story. But it is also important to keep it grounded. The miracle is not that the mountain became merciful. The miracle is that, after an interval long enough for others to conclude he was gone, he regained consciousness at all. There is no need to overstate what the facts already carry. He had been judged dead. His family had been told he had died. Yet, after those 15 hours, he woke in the open, in lethal cold, and moved toward camp. That movement is the turning point of the entire arc, not a triumphant sprint, not a cinematic conquest, just the return of consciousness, followed by enough function, enough will, or enough residual strength to head back toward the place where people might still help him. In survival stories, the most dramatic moment is often imagined as rescue arriving from outside. Here, the first rescue was smaller and stranger. A man everyone had given up for dead stood back up inside his own body. But waking up was not the end of danger. It only carried him from presumed death into a new struggle. Part 3, the price of survival. one measured not in minutes of exposure alone, but in what the cold had already done. Surviving Everest did not mean escaping without devastating injury. The extreme cold left Weathers with severe frostbite. According to the reporting, the damage ultimately required the amputation of his right hand. His left hand could not be restored to normal function either. Instead, it was fashioned into a mitt. That phrasing is stark, and it should be. Survival in this case was inseparable from permanent loss. The same event that made his story extraordinary also altered the basic mechanics of his daily life. Hands are not abstract symbols. They are how a doctor works, how a person dresses, writes, eats, reaches, signals, and touches the world. To lose one hand and most finger function in the other is not a footnote to recovery. It is recovery. And still, even that was not the full extent of the physical aftermath. Accounts of his reconstruction describe how extensive the medical rebuilding became after Everest. The body that returned from the mountain was alive, but it was not simply restored by warming up. It entered a long medical process shaped by frostbites, delayed and unforgiving logic. This is where many survival stories end in public memory. The person lived, therefore the story is over. But with Beck Weathers, the real suspense shifts after survival. Once you know he came back from the snow, a harder question replaces the first one. What kind of life can be rebuilt after injuries that severe? Part 4. The helicopter window. Before that rebuilding could fully begin, he had to be moved off the mountain. His evacuation itself became part of the story's rarity. Reporting identifies the Nepalese pilot Ultirnkol Madan Katrichetri as the man who flew a stripped-down helicopter to extract Weathers at an exceptionally high altitude. That detail matters for two reasons. First, it underlines how narrow the window had become. Weathers was not simply able to walk himself back to ordinary care. He still required an extraordinary effort to get down from a place where flight operations are deeply constrained. Second, it shows that survival on Everest is never a solitary achievement, even when the turning point begins in isolation. A man wakes in the snow alone. A pilot later risks an exceptional mission to help carry that survival forward. The helicopter, then, is not just a transport detail. It marks the handoff from impossible mountain survival to possible medical recovery. It is the moment where the story crosses from exposure to treatment, from storm to surgery, from the indifference of altitude to the deliberate interventions of other human beings. And yet, even after that extraction, another challenge remained. How does a pathologist, after losing his right hand and much of the fine use of the left, Part 5, a new way to work, return to a profession built on precision? The answer was not a dramatic reinvention into some entirely different identity. One of the most striking facts in Weathers' later life is that he returned to pathology. To do it, he formed what Texas Monthly described as a hand-and-glove relationship with a physician's assistant, relying on that partnership for tasks requiring fingers. That phrase captures more than adaptation. It captures interdependence turned into method. Instead of treating disability as the end of skilled work, Weathers and his assistant built a way around the problem with honesty and practicality. The tasks he could not physically perform in the old way did not disappear. They were handled through collaboration. This part of the story matters because comeback can be misunderstood. It does not always mean recovering the exact same body, the exact same habits, or the exact same independence. Sometimes comeback means building a system sturdy enough to let expertise continue in altered form. For a pathologist, that return is especially significant. His profession depended on close work, disciplined observation, and repeated technical actions. After Everest, every one of those demands had to be reconsidered in light of what his hands could and could not do. He did not erase the damage. He worked through it, which raises the final tension in the story. If survival changed his body so completely? Part 6, After Everest. Did it also change the life around that body? By the later accounts of his life, the answer was yes. Reporting on Weathers' recovery says that he overcame his obsession with climbing, saved his failing marriage, and returned successfully to his career. Those outcomes matter because they shift the story away from a simple tale of physical endurance. The mountain did not just threaten his life in one storm. It exposed the cost his choices had already been carrying into the rest of his world. If, after Everest, he overcame his obsession with climbing and repaired his marriage, then the comeback was not only medical, it was relational, it was psychological. It was a reordering of priorities after a brush with death that had already reached his family in the form of a 6 a.m. phone call announcing that he was gone. That is what gives the story its lasting force. Beck Weathers did survive conditions severe enough that others believed he had died. He did wake after 15 hours in a hypothermic coma and move back toward camp. He was evacuated in an extraordinary helicopter mission. He did lose his right hand and the fingers of his left to frostbite, and he did find a way back to pathology through partnership. But the fullest version of the recovery is larger than any single medical headline. It is a man declared dead who kept living long enough to reshape the parts of life that were still within reach: his work, his marriage, and the obsession that had helped lead him onto the mountain in the first place. Everest remains the setting of the miracle. The real measure of it may be what happened after he came down. If this story brought up difficult feelings for you, consider reaching out to local mental health support, a licensed counselor, or a crisis hotline in your area.